Welcome to day 200 on the trail. We have four readings for today from Mark 6, verses 1 through 29, 2 Samuel 16, verse 1 through 17:4, the Song of Solomon, chapter 1, verses 1 through 17, and 3 Maccabees, chapter 4, verses 1 through 22. Today, we begin the Song of Solomon, also known as Canticles or the Song of Songs. This work has been interpreted in vastly different ways over the years. The traditional Jewish understanding is that the book is an allegory regarding God's love for Israel. Others view the Song of Solomon as a poem or a song about marriage, and the two people in love throughout the text are the bride and the bridegroom. Finally, we find commentators who see this work as strictly a piece of love poetry without any deeper religious meaning. The reason that the Song of Solomon has been subjected to such a diversity of interpretations is due to its placement in the canon of the Jewish and Christian Bibles. In the Hebrew Bible, the Song of Solomon is placed among the wisdom books in what's called the writings or the Ketuvim, as one of the 5 festal scrolls, along with Ruth, Ecclesiastes, Lamentations, and Esther. Each of these 5 books were read on Jewish holidays as prescribed in the Mishnah. Ruth was associated with Pentecost, Ecclesiastes with the Feast of Tabernacles or Sukkot, Lamentations with the 9th of Av, the traditional anniversary of the destruction of the first and second temples, and Esther with Purim. The 5th of this collection, the Song of Solomon, is read on the Sabbath of Passover week, at least as far back as the 8th century AD. Now, in the Christian scriptures, we find the Song of Solomon grouped with the poetic books, which include books like Psalms, Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes. This ordering follows the Septuagint, or the Greek version of the Hebrew Bible. Regarding the dating and authorship of the Song of Solomon, scholarship varies widely, from the time of King Solomon of Israel to the late Persian period. However, it is quite likely that the Song of Solomon was written during the reign of Solomon. Now, whether it was written by Solomon or for Solomon by a member of the royal court is unknown. One of the greatest challenges of reading the Song of Solomon is to read it as a poem before trying to associate theological meaning. On the surface, this song is love poetry, focusing on the romantic relationship between a man and a woman. So we should start there before looking for religious connections. In our reading from 2 Samuel today, David has been forced to flee Jerusalem following his son Absalom's move to usurp the throne. As David leaves the city, many who are still loyal to David journey east with him. One of those who rallies to David is Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth. We first learned about Ziba and Mephibosheth in 2 Samuel chapter 9. At this point in David's story, he has unified the kingdom and moved the capital and the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. Then in chapter 9, David asks this, from 2 Samuel chapter 9, verses 1 through 3. David asked, "Is there anyone left of the house of Saul, to whom I may show kindness for Jonathan's sake?" Now there was a servant of the house of Saul, whose name was Ziba, and he was summoned to David. And David said to him, "Are you Ziba?" And he said, "At your service." The king said, "Is there anyone remaining of the house of Saul, to whom I may show the kindness of God?" David's motive here have come under some question. While it is entirely possible that David simply wants to show kindness to Saul's household, in particular, loyalty to Jonathan, it would also be politically advantageous for David to bring a member of Saul's household into the palace to placate any of those who would sympathize with the house of Saul. Also, because he is lame, Mephibosheth was not politically dangerous to David. Therefore, while David's actions greatly benefit Mephibosheth, they also serve the king's own interests. So now we return to chapter 16 and David's escape from Jerusalem. Here, we will also continue the story of Mephibosheth and his servant Ziba. From 2 Samuel chapter 16, verses 1 through 4. When David had passed a little beyond the summit, Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, met him, with a couple of donkeys saddled, carrying 200 loaves of bread, 100 bunches of raisins, 100 of summer fruits, and 1 skin of wine. The king said to Ziba, "Why have you brought these?" Ziba answered, "The donkeys are for the king's household to ride, the bread and summer fruit for the young men to eat, and the wine is for those to drink who faint in the wilderness." The king said, "And where is your master's son?" Ziba said to the king, "He remains in Jerusalem, for he said, 'Today the house of Israel will give me back my grandfather's kingdom.'" Then the king said to Ziba, "All that belonged to Mephibosheth is now yours." Ziba said, "I do obeisance. Let me find favor in your sight, my lord the king." In this part of the story, Ziba comes to David bearing needed supplies in abundance. But notice that David quickly asks about Mephibosheth. Was David wondering why Mephibosheth did not travel with Ziba? Did Mephibosheth know that Ziba had even brought these supplies? We may recall that when Abigail brought similar supplies to David in 1 Samuel chapter 25, she did not tell her husband Nabal. Is David questioning Mephibosheth's loyalty? Ziba, however, has decided to side with the escaping King David. And with Mephibosheth absent, David decides to believe Ziba's testimony about Mephibosheth. Now, Mephibosheth seems to believe that he can leverage Absalom's coup into regaining some of Saul's kingdom. So David confiscates the lands belonging to Mephibosheth and gives them to Ziba. However, remember that David is fleeing Jerusalem and Absalom has seized control. So perhaps David believes that he will be restored by God and return to Jerusalem to lead God's people once again. Now, to round out our story of Ziba and Mephibosheth, later in 2 Samuel 19:27, when David is restored to the throne, Mephibosheth goes to meet with David. There, Mephibosheth claims that Ziba slandered him and that he has always been loyal to David. 2 Samuel 19, verses 24 through 30. Mephibosheth, grandson of Saul, came down to meet the king. He had not taken care of his feet, or trimmed his beard, or washed his clothes, from the day the king left until the day he came back in safety. When he came from Jerusalem to meet the king said to him, "Why did you not go with me, Mephibosheth?" He answered, "My lord, O king, my servant deceived me. For your servant said to him, 'Saddle a donkey for me, so that I may ride on it and go with the king, for your servant is lame.' He has slandered your servant to my lord the king. But my lord the king is like the angel of God. Do therefore what seems good to you. For all my father's house were doomed to death before my lord the king, but you set your servant among those who eat at your table. What further right have I, then, to appeal to the king?" The king said to him, "Why speak any more of your affairs? I have decided. You and Ziba shall divide the land." Mephibosheth said to the king, "Let him take it all, since my lord the king has arrived home safely." In the end, we do not know if Mephibosheth had plans to betray David, or if Ziba was taking advantage of his master's lameness to garner favor with David. And it appears that David does not know either. So instead of investigating further, David simply divides the property between them. Looking back at this story of Ziba and Mephibosheth, the ending is not very satisfying. Whatever relationship they had previously is now broken. Instead of sharing property and working together, they now go their separate ways. Maybe this is the best they can hope for in this moment. But this feels more like armistice, the cessation of conflict, and not true peace, which brings wholeness and restoration. Taking the time, effort, and sometimes the pain to discover the truth is the only way to find true restoration, peace, and wholeness. Thank you for joining us today. Until next time, stay on the trail.